In February of 2001, a rancher named Mae Calder walked into the Sheridan County Extension office with red mud frozen to the cuffs of her jeans and asked one question that made the room go quiet. Had anybody in northeastern Wyoming ever run laying hens 4 days behind a beef herd, not beside the cattle, not in a backyard coop? Behind them, the agent at the counter, Tom Ralston, had spent 22 years helping ranch families sort through forage reports, calving losses, mineral programs, and the price of hay. He knew what desperation sounded like. He knew what a bad winter could do to a person trying to keep a place alive with borrowed money and thin grass. So he chose his words carefully. He told Mae there were poultry bulletins at the university in Laramie. He told her there were grazing bulletins too, but he said he did not know of anyone trying to turn chickens into part of a cow-calf operation. Mae nodded, thanked him, and drove home. She did not tell Tom Ralston that the question had already been answered. The answer was sitting in a dented blue recipe box in the bottom drawer of her mother's roll-top desk. The cards inside were not recipes. They were pasture records. Mae's mother, Ellen Calder, had kept them from 1974 to 1988, back when the Calder place still ran on 190 black Angus pairs and a patchwork of rented grass east of the Bighorns. Each card was written in pencil: date, paddock, herd count, fly pressure, manure condition, egg count, rainfall, treatment cost. At the front of the box, on a card darkened by coffee stains, Ellen had written one sentence: "Birds go where the medicine bill starts." Mae had read that card once when she was 15 and thought it sounded like one of her mother's strange sayings. She read it again in January of 2001 after her banker circled a number on her operating statement and asked why parasite treatment had climbed for the 5th year in a row. The number was Mae Sao Ngien Tambe Mae. Not feed, not fuel, not fencing. Parasites, hornflies, face flies, internal worms. Repeat treatments across cattle that were already losing condition on grass that did not come back the way it used to. Mae had taken over the ranch 3 years earlier after Ellen's stroke. Her father had died before that. Her neighbors said she had inherited a hard piece of country in a hard decade. They were right. But the recipe box said something more dangerous. It said the place had once carried itself better because the cattle had not been working alone. Ellen's old cards described a system her own father had brought north from a dryland farm in Nebraska. The cattle moved first. The hens followed 3 to 5 days later, when the manure pats were still fresh enough to hold larvae, but old enough that the cattle had moved on. The chickens tore the pats open, ate the fly larvae and parasite eggs, scattered the manure, and left their own nitrogen behind. It was pest control. It was fertility. It was a small egg business, and it used the same acres twice. Ellen's numbers were not romantic. They were blunt. In 1982, 240 hens cut the summer fly treatment bill by an estimated High-End Bay Cham and brought in mutton Sao Bon Mui in egg sales. In 1985, after a wet June that should have produced a brutal fly season, the work paddocks showed less head shaking, faster manure breakdown, and thicker regrowth by the second grazing pass. Then the cards stopped in 1988. A hailstorm tore two portable shelters apart. Coyotes found the third. Ellen was caring for Mae's sick father by then, and she did what ranchers do when they are short on time and cash. She cut the system down to what she could survive, but she never threw the box away. Mae ordered 520 pullets from a hatchery outside Casper in March of 2001. She did not call it innovation. She called it repayment. By the last week of May, she and her hired hand, Roy Kimball, had built 4 low portable shelters out of stock panels, skids, tin, and hardware cloth. Each shelter could be pulled with a 4-wheeler. Each had nest boxes bolted to one wall, water jugs strapped down with baling twine, and enough weight in the frame to survive a Wyoming wind without turning into scrap metal. Roy had worked for Mae's mother and had the particular silence of a man who had seen a lot of ideas die in the weather. When Mae showed him the recipe box, he read 3 cards and said, "Your mother moved those birds like she meant it." Mae said, "Then we moved them like she meant it." They started with the east pasture. The cattle entered a paddock on Monday morning. 4 days later, the hens came in behind them. The birds stayed just long enough to work the manure, then moved again. Mae wrote everything down on new cards, because Ellen's first rule was that a system you did not measure was only a feeling with a fence around it. The first month looked ridiculous from the road. A serious beef ranch had Angus pairs, mineral tubs, hay equipment, working dogs, and a squeeze chute. It did not have hundreds of hens marching behind portable huts like some county fair exhibit that had escaped into the sage. By July, the men at the feed store had a name for it: Mae's Egg Circus. Lynn Bishop, who ran cattle along Crazy Woman Creek, said it loud enough for her to hear while she was loading salt blocks. He did not say it cruelly. That was worse. He said it with the weary confidence of a neighbor who believed he was watching somebody drift away from the real work. Mae let the bag settle into the truck bed and told him the hens had already paid for half their feed by chasing larvae out of manure. Lynn smiled politely. People can smile at a fact when it has not cost them anything yet. By September, Mae had sold 480 dozen eggs through a grocery in Buffalo. The money was useful, but it was not the point. The point was in the cattle. The east herd needed 1 less fly treatment than the west herd. Calves in the worked rotation held condition better through August. Manure pats disappeared in days instead of sitting like dry plates on the ground. After a half-inch rain, the worked paddocks greened from the bottom instead of only shining on top. Mae did not tell the feed store. She wrote it on the cards. In 2002, she expanded the system to both pastures. In 2003, parasite treatment dropped 29% against her 2000 baseline. In 2004, the egg route paid for 2 replacement shelters and most of Roy's extra hours. In 2005, a range specialist from the university stopped at the place after Tom Ralston sent him a note that said one ranch east of the Bighorns was not behaving like the others. The specialist, Dr. Nathan Keel, walked the paddocks with a probe, a clipboard, and the expression of a man trying not to form an opinion before the soil told him what it knew. 6 weeks later, he called Mae and said the nitrogen distribution in the work paddocks was not what he expected from an unfertilized beef operation. Mae said, "They are fertilized." Dr. Keel said, "Not with a spreader." Mae said, "No, that was the first time anyone outside the ranch took the chickens seriously. Not because they looked wise, because the soil did." Then came the summer that made everyone else look. The drought of 2007 arrived in Sheridan County without drama at first. A dry April, a mean wind in May, a June that promised storms and gave lightning. By the second week of July, ponds were pulling away from their banks and pastures that should have been carrying. Pears were starting to show dirt between plants. Fly pressure exploded. The county office called it the worst face fly season in nearly 20 years. Treatment bills went up at the same time hay prospects went down. That is the kind of math that makes a ranch kitchen quiet after supper. Len Bishop's calves came off light that fall. His summer vet and parasite costs hit Jaime Tamgan Bontum nearly $11,000 above his 3-year average. He sold 63 pairs in October because the grass on his west lease could not justify carrying them through winter. He was not alone. The sale barn added 2 extra runs that month. Cattle came in early, dusty, and thin. Everybody had a reason. No rain, too many flies, bad regrowth, bad timing, all true. But on the Calder place, the same drought met a different pasture. Mae did not escape the year. Nobody escapes a dry year in cattle country. Her grass shortened, her ponds dropped, her hay worries kept her up. But the worked paddocks did not collapse. 7 years of hens tearing manure open and spreading fertility had changed the soil in the slow way that does not announce itself until pressure arrives. The roots held longer, rain-soaked instead of sheeted. Regrowth returned 10 to 18 days faster after each storm than it did on her unworked lease ground. And in the worst fly year in county memory, the Calder treatment bill came in lower than it had been in 2000. Not a little lower, 43% lower. The hens were not a cute extra income stream anymore. They were a living maintenance crew that had been breaking the next outbreak before it hatched. In late October, Len Bishop drove to Mae's place and stopped at the east gate. He sat in his pickup for a while. Mae saw him from the shelter line but did not wave. She was carrying a water jug in each hand, and the wind was pushing dust sideways across the 2-track. When Len finally got out, he did not start with weather. He said, "I have been making jokes about your birds for 6 years." Mae set the jugs down. Len looked past her at the hens working through the paddock the cattle had left on Monday. They moved with no drama, scratching and pecking through the exact places where the next fly cycle would have begun. He said, "I sold 63 pairs. Mae did not answer. He said, "Tell me what your mother wrote down." That was the first honest question he had asked about the system. Mae opened the gate. For the next 3 hours, she walked him through everything. The 4-day lag, the stocking limits, the shelter moves, the predator checks, the egg route, the daily cards, The reason shortcuts ruined the whole thing. She showed him Ellen's box at the kitchen table, but she did not let him copy only the easy parts. A few hens behind cattle was not the system. Egg money was not the system. A pretty pasture was not the system. The system was timing, birds, cattle, manure, rest, records, and enough humility to believe that a pasture could be smarter than the person managing it. Lynn ordered 300 pullets that winter. By spring of 2008, 6 more ranchers had asked Mae to walk them through the rotation. She made each of them bring a notebook. She made each of them write the first rule at the top of the first page. What is not recorded will be misremembered. In 2009, Tom Ralston helped organize a county field day at the Calder place, the same extension office where Mae's question had once gone quiet, now sent out a flyer with the words Poultry Assisted Grazing on it, as if the idea had grown official legs. Mae hated the flyer. Roy laughed for 10 minutes, but the numbers were harder to laugh at. Across the first 7 cooperating ranches, parasite treatment costs dropped between 17 and 38% against their own 5-year baselines. Calves from the integrated rotations averaged 15 pounds heavier at weaning than comparable non-integrated pastures in the county review. Dr. Keel's soil samples showed higher organic matter in the longest-running worked paddocks and more even nitrogen distribution down into the root zone. None of it made the chickens magical. It made them placed correctly. That was the lesson people had missed while driving past Mae's fence line. The birds were not replacing the cattle operation. They were revealing what the cattle operation had been leaking: fertility, larvae, money, time, resilience. In 2012, Dr. Keel published the Calder Ranch as the lead case in a multi-year study of poultry integrated beef grazing in dryland northern range systems. He wrote that the Calder records were unusually valuable because the practice had not begun as a grant project, a brand campaign, or a university trial. It had begun as family management, written on index cards by a woman who expected no applause for doing the work. Mae mailed a copy of the paper to her mother's care home. Ellen could not read much by then. Her hands shook, her speech came and went. But Mae placed the blue recipe box in her lap and opened the front card. Birds go where the medicine bill starts. Ellen touched the sentence with one finger and smiled like she had heard a gate latch close exactly where it belonged. Mae ran the Calder place for 18 more years. The shelters were rebuilt 3 times. The route changed when a grocery closed and changed again when Mae's niece started selling eggs through a winter market. Roy retired. Tom Ralston did too. Lynn Bishop became the man at field days who warned new ranchers not to buy chickens until they had a rotation plan, predator plan, and pencil sharpener. The blue recipe box stayed in the roll-top desk. It has 4 handwritings in it now. Ellen's pencil on the old cards. Mae's blocky notes from the years she was still proving the system to herself. Roy's cramped numbers from morning checks. And, beginning in 2020, Mae's nephew Caleb, who came home after college thinking technology would be the thing that changed the ranch and learned that the oldest tool on the place was still the most demanding one. A card, a pencil, a date, a pasture telling the truth slowly. The best grass on the Calder place is still in the east rotation. It was the best grass in the dry summer of 2007. It was the best grass again in 2012. It will probably be the best grass in the next bad year too. Not because the country got kinder, and not because chickens saved a ranch in one season. They did not. They saved it 4 days at a time. That is what the people at the fence line could not see. The birds were small. The work was repetitive. The proof was boring until the year came when boring proof was the only thing strong enough to hold. A ranch does not always lose itself in a disaster. Sometimes it loses itself through the little leaks everyone accepts as normal, and sometimes the answer is already in the drawer, written by someone who had less money, fewer tools, and a better memory for what the land used to do for free.